On March 12, 2005, truck driver Victor Hayes pulled into the Pine Ridge truck stop in rural Vermont. After 14 hours of driving, the 53-year-old was ready for a meal and some sleep before continuing his journey to Albany. What Victor didn't know was that someone had been watching him. This person had followed him for over 100 miles, targeting him for reasons that would only become clear later. The Pine Ridge truck stop was nothing special, just a gas station, a small diner, and shower facilities for truck drivers traveling through the Northeast. Victor followed his usual routine: refuel, eat dinner, call his company, and sleep. Security cameras recorded him leaving the diner at 9:42 p.m. He carried a container of leftover chicken fried steak as he walked back to his truck, a white Kenworth with faded green company letters. The cameras lost sight of him as he walked between two parked trailers. Victor Hayes was never seen alive again. The next morning, Victor's dispatcher, Melissa Donovan, grew worried when he didn't check in. She had worked with Victor for over 10 years and described him as military precise about his schedule. When she saw his truck hadn't moved from the truck stop for over 12 hours, she knew something was wrong. Local police searched the area. They found Victor's truck locked, with his logbook open on the dashboard. His overnight bag was still in the sleeping area, but Victor was gone. His leftover dinner sat untouched on the passenger seat. This suggested whatever happened occurred before he even entered his truck. At first, police thought he might have had a medical emergency or walked away. But 3 days later, the case took a darker turn. A highway worker found Victor's wallet in a ditch about 7 miles north of the truck stop. The money and credit cards were still inside, but something had been added: a Polaroid photo showing Victor unconscious with his hands tied using zip ties. The FBI joined the investigation. As they reviewed security footage, they noticed something local police had missed: a dark SUV that entered the truck stop shortly after Victor arrived. This vehicle drove around the lot twice before parking near the edge of the camera's view. No one was seen getting out, and the SUV left about 40 minutes after Victor was last seen. The investigation might have stalled if not for what happened 13 days after Victor disappeared. Another truck driver, 45-year-old Julia Bennett, pulled into the same truck stop around 10:30 p.m. Unlike Victor, Julia had a habit of taking photos of her truck at every stop, something she started doing after a minor hit-and-run incident years earlier. While taking her photos that night, Julia saw something disturbing. She later told police, "I was taking pictures of my truck when I noticed movement underneath the trailer next to mine. At first I thought it was an animal, maybe a stray dog, but then I realized it was a person crawling on their stomach between the wheels." Julia immediately got back in her truck, locked the doors, and called 911. By the time police arrived 17 minutes later, the person was gone. But Julia's photos provided the first clear image of the suspect: a man in his 30s or 40s wearing dark clothing and tactical-style gloves. Most disturbing was what he held in his hand: a telescoping rod with a wire loop at the end, similar to the poles animal control officers use to catch aggressive dogs. Police alerted all truck stops within 100 miles. For weeks, patrol cars maintained a visible presence at the Pine Ridge truck stop and similar facilities along the highway. The FBI released a sketch based on Julia's photos, which generated dozens of tips but no solid leads. Nearly 2 months after Victor vanished, in early May 2005, the breakthrough came from an unexpected source. State police responded to a car accident on a rural road about 30 miles from the truck stop. The driver, 39-year-old Lawrence Sullivan, had lost control on a curve and hit a tree. When officers searched his vehicle, they found disturbing items: zip ties matching those in the Polaroid of Victor, a telescoping catch pole, several syringes containing traces of powerful sedatives, and most damning of all, Victor Hayes' company ID badge. Inside a locked toolbox in the trunk, investigators discovered more Polaroids, dozens showing not just Victor Hayes but 5 other men, all appearing unconscious in similar poses. One photo revealed part of what forensic experts later identified as the interior of a specific van model. Property records led police to an abandoned dairy farm owned by Sullivan's deceased uncle. There, in a converted milk house, with reinforced doors and blacked-out windows, they found the horrifying answer to what happened to Victor Hayes, and presumably the other men in the photos. The concrete-floored room contained a metal bed bolted to the floor with restraint points at each corner. A drain had been installed in the center of the room. Forensic teams found hair and blood samples from multiple people, including Hayes. On a workbench, investigators discovered notebooks filled with detailed surveillance notes on dozens of truck drivers, including their routes, schedules, and habits. Lawrence Sullivan survived the crash but suffered serious head trauma. When he regained consciousness in the hospital under police guard, he was unable or unwilling to speak. Doctors confirmed he had damage to areas of his brain associated with speech and memory. Whether real or fake, Sullivan's silence meant many questions about his crimes would remain unanswered. From the evidence, investigators pieced together how this predator operated. Sullivan would identify potential victims at truck stops, follow them to learn their habits, then lie in wait. Using the catch pole to keep his distance, he would inject his victims with sedatives, then transfer them unconscious to his van. The most chilling discovery came from Sullivan's home computer. For years, he had visited online forums about true crime and serial killers, especially those who targeted travelers on highways. In private messages, he had expressed admiration for their methods, while criticizing the mistakes that led to their capture. Sullivan had worked as a truck driver himself between 1998 and 2003, but lost his commercial license after safety violations. Records showed he had briefly worked as an overnight janitor at the Pine Ridge truck stop before being fired for strange behavior. This background gave him detailed knowledge of trucker routines and the isolated areas of large truck stops, especially at night. As the investigation expanded, police connected Sullivan to at least 3 other disappearances of truck drivers across Vermont and neighboring states. In each case, the pattern was similar: experienced drivers vanishing from truck stops with their belongings left behind. The fate of Victor Hayes was finally discovered when search dogs led police to a remote section of the dairy farm. There, in a dense stand of pine trees, they found human remains in shallow graves. DNA testing later confirmed the remains belonged to Hayes and 4 other victims. The Sullivan case shocked the trucking industry, highlighting dangers that many drivers had worried about but rarely discussed openly. Truck stops across the country implemented new security measures, including better lighting, more cameras focused on truck parking areas, and in some locations, regular security patrols. For many long-haul truckers, the case confirmed their worst fears about the dangers lurking in the blind spots of America's highways. The solitude that many drivers enjoyed became something more ominous, isolation that could make them targets. Female truckers like Julia Bennett, whose quick thinking and photography habit helped break the case, felt especially vulnerable. In response, trucking companies developed new safety protocols, including regular check-ins and panic buttons in newer trucks. Many drivers began traveling in loose convoys, maintaining radio contact with colleagues even during rest periods. The buddy system, once mainly used by beginners, became standard practice for veterans too. Lawrence Sullivan never stood trial for his crimes. In October 2006, while awaiting evaluation at a secure medical facility, he used a sharpened plastic utensil to cut an artery in his arm. He left no suicide note, taking his twisted motivations to the grave. The Victor Hayes Memorial Fund was established by his former employer to improve safety conditions for long-haul drivers. Every year, on the anniversary of his disappearance, truckers passing the Pine Ridge truck stop sound their horns in tribute, echoing across the Vermont foothills. Today, a simple stone marker stands in the truck stop's lounge, bearing the names of the confirmed victims and a quote chosen by Hayes' widow: "The road is long, but they are not forgotten." For veteran drivers who still travel through the rolling Vermont countryside on Route 376, the Pine Ridge truck stop serves as a grim reminder of the vulnerability that comes with life on the road. Many still refuse to park in the far section of the lot, referring to it as the blind spot, a term that has nothing to do with mere visibility and everything to do with the predator who once hunted there, selecting his victims from the shadows between the trucks. The case fundamentally changed how the trucking industry approaches driver safety, particularly during overnight rest periods. But perhaps most unsettling is how effectively Sullivan exploited the truckers' world, using their necessary routines and isolation against them, turning a simple rest stop into a hunting ground. Law enforcement agencies now include truck stops in regular patrol routes, and FBI training includes specific sections on crimes targeting transportation workers. But for those who drive the long, lonely stretches of America's highways, the legacy of Lawrence Sullivan is a constant reminder that sometimes the greatest danger isn't the road ahead, but what or who might be watching from the blind spot. On August 17, 2018, truck driver Sophia Blackwell steered her 18-wheeler onto Interstate 5 just north of Redding, California. The 39-year-old from Portland was transporting medical supplies to Sacramento, a familiar route she'd driven many times during her 15-year career. What started as a normal summer drive would soon become one of the most terrifying survival stories in modern American trucking. The summer of 2018 had been brutal for California wildfires. Drought and record-breaking heat had turned much of the state into a tinderbox. By mid-August, firefighters were battling 17 active fires, stretching emergency services to their limits. The largest, the Mendocino Complex Fire, had already burned over 350,000 acres. While news reports focused on fires threatening populated areas, the Ponderosa Creek Fire received less attention. It had been burning in the mountains west of Interstate 5 near the Oregon-California border. Fire officials initially classified it as a moderate threat in remote forest land, so they assigned limited resources as they focused on fires threatening towns and cities. That assessment changed dramatically on the morning of August 17th, when unexpected winds pushed the Ponderosa Creek Fire toward the interstate with shocking speed. By noon, the fire had grown from 8,000 acres to over 25,000, moving faster than fire authorities could warn travelers on I-5. Blackwell's truck was one of about 60 vehicles, including 7 other commercial trucks, caught in a 20-mile stretch of highway that would soon become engulfed in flames. The first sign of danger came when she noticed an unusual haze to the west, dulling the abnormally clear summer view of the Shasta Trinity National Forest. "Something's not right with that smoke pattern," she said to another trucker over her CB radio. The reply would prove eerily accurate. "Wind's shifting. If that's coming our way, we're in trouble." By 1:30 p.m., the situation quickly worsened. Blackwell's dash cam, recovered later, showed how rapidly the conditions around her truck changed. In less than 20 minutes, visibility dropped from clear to less than a quarter mile as smoke covered the highway. Burning embers began falling on the road, carried by winds that had strengthened to nearly 50 miles per hour. At 1:47 p.m., Blackwell's dashcam recorded her slowing down as brake lights appeared ahead. Traffic had completely stopped. Through her windshield, she could see highway patrol officers urgently directing vehicles to pull over. One officer, barely visible through the thickening smoke, was shouting instructions through a bullhorn. "They're saying the fire jumped the ridge," a panicked voice reported over the CB. "It's coming straight for the highway." The recording captured Blackwell's steady response despite the growing danger. "Everyone stay calm. We've got concrete under us and clearing on both sides of the road. If we stay in our vehicles, we should be okay." Her logical assessment didn't account for the extraordinary power of the approaching firestorm. By 2:00 p.m., the main front of the Ponderosa Creek Fire reached the highway. Winds gusting over 60 miles per hour pushed the flames uphill with explosive force, creating what fire scientists call a flame tsunami, a massive wall of fire moving faster than a person can run. Blackwell's dash cam recorded the moment the fire front hit the line of stranded vehicles. In seconds, visibility dropped to almost zero as superheated smoke surrounded the highway. Through the darkness, flashes of intense orange light revealed trees exploding into flames on both sides of the road. The temperature inside Blackwell's cab, according to her truck's sensors, jumped from 92 degrees to over 120 degrees within minutes. What followed was 45 minutes of sustained terror that survivors would later struggle to describe. With nowhere to go and no way to drive out of the inferno, the stranded travelers could only shelter in their vehicles and hope the fire would pass before the intense heat became deadly. For Blackwell, whose training included emergency procedures for various road hazards, the situation required immediate action. Her truck's dash cam and the recovered audio from her cab recorder documented her methodical response to the growing crisis. First, she used her truck's radio to broadcast clear instructions to nearby truckers. Shut down engines. Fire will consume oxygen and could suffocate engines. Save batteries for emergency measures. Close all vents. Use water to dampen any cloth you can find and cover your face. Then she took stock of her own supplies, 2 gallons of drinking water, an emergency breathing mask from her hazmat kit, and the relative protection of her well-insulated cab. She dampened towels and sealed them around the edges of her doors and windows, creating makeshift filters against the toxic smoke seeping into the cabin through gaps. Through the smoke, Blackwell could see other travelers who were less prepared. A family in a minivan directly ahead of her appeared to be panicking, with children pressed against the windows. Using her truck's horn to get their attention, she held up written instructions on a piece of cardboard. "Stay in vehicle, wet clothes, cover faces." The most harrowing moment, clearly captured on the dash cam, came at about 2:23 p.m. A massive Douglas fir tree, its trunk already weakened by fire, crashed across the highway, Less than 50 feet ahead of Blackwell's truck, the tree struck a passenger car, crushing its roof. Without hesitation, Blackwell grabbed her emergency kit and left the relative safety of her cab. The external camera on her truck recorded her fighting through intense heat and near zero visibility to reach the damaged vehicle. Finding the driver's side crushed, she moved to the passenger door, which she managed to wrench open after several attempts. From inside, she pulled an unconscious man, later identified as retired school teacher Daniel Morgan, 68, across the center console and out of the wreckage. Half dragging, half carrying Morgan, Blackwell returned to her truck. The entire rescue took less than 2 minutes, but the external camera shows how the extreme conditions immediately affected her. Her exposed skin visibly reddened from the intense heat, and she stumbled twice from the combined effects of smoke inhalation and poor visibility. Back in her cab with the injured Morgan, Blackwell radioed her situation to any emergency responders who might be listening. "I've got an injured civilian male, approximately 70, unconscious but breathing, significant head cut, vehicle crushed by fallen tree at mile marker 752, immediate medical evacuation needed." The response came not from emergency services but from another trucker a quarter-mile ahead. "No way in or out right now. Fires across the entire road about a mile north. We're completely cut off." For the next 30 minutes, Blackwell gave basic first aid to Morgan, monitored his breathing, and continued broadcasting their position, all while the firestorm raged around them. The cab temperature continued to rise, reaching nearly 140 degrees, despite all her efforts to insulate against the heat. Dashcam footage shows her regularly pouring small amounts of water over both herself and the still unconscious Morgan to prevent heat stroke. At about 3:10 p.m., the main fire front began to pass, having burned through most of the available fuel in the immediate area. Visibility improved slightly, revealing the full extent of the destruction. Trees continued to burn on both sides of the highway, but the massive wall of flame had moved east, leaving behind a smoldering, apocalyptic landscape. As conditions slightly improved, Blackwell spotted the flashing lights of emergency vehicles approaching from the south, firefighters and paramedics who had fought through the aftermath of the fire to reach the stranded motorists. Her final recorded words before emergency responders reached her truck captured both relief and continuing concern. "They're coming. Hang on, sir. Help is almost here." The full impact of the Ponderosa Creek fire entrapment only became clear in the following days. Of the 60-plus vehicles trapped in the fire corridor, 58 people survived, many suffering from smoke inhalation and heat exposure, but remarkably with no life-threatening injuries. 3 people died, an elderly couple who had tried to flee their vehicle on foot, and the driver of a convertible with its top down who suffered fatal burns before the fire front had even fully reached the highway. Daniel Morgan, the man Blackwell had pulled from the crushed car, spent 2 weeks in intensive care with a fractured skull and third-degree burns on his arms. He later credited Blackwell with saving his life, telling reporters, "I remember the tree coming down and then nothing until I woke up in the hospital. The doctors told me I had minutes before smoke inhalation would have killed me if I'd stayed in that car." For Sophia Blackwell, the ordeal left both physical and psychological scars. She suffered second-degree burns on her face, neck, and arms from her rescue effort, requiring skin grafts and months of recovery. The psychological impact was equally challenging. PTSD caused recurring nightmares and panic attacks triggered by the smell of smoke or the sound of strong wind. Yet the experience also transformed her into an unexpected advocate for improved emergency procedures on America's highways. In the months following the Ponderosa Creek incident, she worked with the American Trucking Association to develop new training specifically addressing wildfire encounters. Her dash cam footage, which she donated to the National Fire Protection Association, became a key part of educational materials used to train both professional drivers and emergency responders. The Ponderosa Creek fire entrapment led to significant policy changes for California's transportation and forestry departments. Investigators determined that the rapid advance of the fire toward the highway could have been predicted hours earlier, but confusion between agencies had delayed both monitoring the fire's movement and issuing highway closure orders. In response, California created a new integrated alert system linking fire behavior modeling directly to transportation management centers, allowing for earlier highway closures when fire behavior suggests potential risks to travel corridors. 5 other western states prone to wildfires have since adopted this system. For the trucking industry, the Ponderosa Creek incident highlighted both the unique vulnerabilities and crucial capabilities of commercial drivers during natural disasters. Commercial trucks, with their reinforced cabs, elevated visibility, and robust communication systems, proved to be among the safest vehicles during the fire entrapment. Afterward, several trucking companies added fire-specific equipment to their trucks, including personal air filtration masks and thermal blankets. Sophia Blackwell eventually returned to trucking 9 months after the incident, though she requested routes that kept her away from high fire risk areas. When asked by an interviewer why she chose to return to the profession despite her traumatic experience, her answer was straightforward. The road is still where I belong, but now I drive with a deeper understanding of what it means to be responsible for not just my cargo, but potentially for the lives of everyone around me on that highway. Today, a small memorial stands at the Ponderosa Creek viewpoint along Interstate 5, honoring those who lost their lives and recognizing the extraordinary resilience of those who survived. A bronze plaque bears the names of the 3 who died, alongside a simple quote from Sophia Blackwell: "In our darkest moments on the highway, we are never truly alone." For truckers who still travel the I-5 corridor through California's fire-prone regions, the lessons of Ponderosa Creek have become part of the collective wisdom passed from experienced drivers to newcomers. Chief among them is Blackwell's calm directive during the height of the crisis: "Stay in your vehicle, protect your air, help who you can." The true horror of the Ponderosa Creek fire entrapment lies not in the death toll, which could have been much higher without the quick thinking of drivers like Blackwell, but in the realization that climate change is creating conditions where such incidents are increasingly likely. Each summer since 2018 has brought new wildfire records to the western United States, and rapid moving fires trapping travelers has occurred in various locations from Oregon to Colorado. For American truckers, particularly those whose routes take them through the fire-prone regions of the West, the Ponderosa Creek incident serves as both a cautionary tale and a testament to the difference that one prepared, level-headed driver can make when natural forces transform familiar highways into corridors of fire. In the early morning darkness of November 18, 2008, truck driver Alexander Reed guided his 18-wheeler along the winding roads of Montana's Bitterroot Range. The 53-year-old from Portland was hauling industrial refrigeration equipment to Missoula. He was taking Highway 472, a less-traveled mountain route, to avoid construction delays on the main interstate as an early winter storm dropped heavy snow across the region. Reed checked in with his dispatcher at 4:17 a.m. "Visibility is down to about 50 yards, he said over the crackling CB radio. "But I've got chains on, and I'm making decent time. Should clear Black Frost Canyon before the worst hits." This was the last time anyone would hear from Alexander Reed for the next 72 hours, hours that would become one of the most disturbing and puzzling incidents in American trucking history. When Reed didn't arrive for his scheduled delivery in Missoula by noon, his employer, Northwestern Logistics, began their standard procedures for a delayed driver. They tried to reach him by radio and cell phone, but got no response. The truck's GPS tracking system showed it had stopped moving around 5:30 a.m. in a remote section of Highway 472 that runs through Black Frost Canyon, a steep walled ravine known among local drivers for poor cell reception and dangerous winter conditions. By 3:05 p.m., with no word from Reed and the GPS showing no movement for over 9 hours, Northwestern Logistics called the Montana Highway Patrol. Given the severe weather, authorities thought Reed had either pulled over to wait out the storm or possibly slid off the road. A patrol unit was sent out but had trouble reaching the location due to the rapidly piling snow. By nightfall, with conditions deemed too dangerous to continue searching, the operation was put on hold until morning. The next day, as the storm cleared, search and rescue teams accessed Highway 472 from both ends. At 11:23 a.m., they found Reed's truck, a white Kenworth T680 with Northwestern Logistics markings, parked in a small turnout about halfway through Black Frost Canyon. The engine was off, the doors were locked, and there was no sign of the driver. What investigators found inside the truck only deepened the mystery. Reed's logbook was open on the dash, with his last entry noting poor visibility and his decision to wait out the worst of the storm. His wallet, containing $237 in cash and all his credit cards, was in the center console. His insulated jacket still hung on the back of the driver's seat. Most puzzling was his cell phone, plugged into the charger with several missed calls from his employer and family. There were no signs of struggle or foul play inside the cab. The only unusual thing was a half-eaten breakfast sandwich and a thermos of coffee that had spilled across the passenger seat, suggesting Reed may have left the vehicle in a hurry. Outside, investigators found boot prints in the snow leading from the driver's side door toward the edge of the turnout, where they suddenly disappeared at the guardrail overlooking a steep wooded slope. Despite an extensive search of the canyon below, including the use of dogs trained to find human remains, no trace of Alexander Reed was found. As news of the disappearance spread through the close-knit trucking community, an unexpected development brought investigators a potential lead. Bethany Hoffman, a 45-year-old trucker from Montana, contacted authorities after seeing a news report about Reed. Hoffman had been driving the same route in the opposite direction during the storm and had stopped at the same turnout around 5:20 a.m. to secure a shifting load. "I was struggling with the straps in the snow when headlights came around the bend," Hoffman later told investigators. "It was a relief to see another vehicle. That road gets lonely, especially in bad weather. The truck pulled into the turnout behind me, and I figured it was another driver waiting out the storm." Hoffman described finishing her work and climbing back into her cab. As she prepared to pull out, she noticed something odd. A smaller vehicle, possibly an SUV, had pulled in behind the second truck. Through the swirling snow and darkness, she could make out what appeared to be a flashing light on its roof. "I assumed it was road maintenance or maybe a highway patrol car," she said. "I didn't think much of it at the time. The weather was getting worse by the minute, and I was focused on getting through the canyon before it became impassable." What Hoffman saw was potentially the last documented sighting of Alexander Reed and his truck. The timing matched the GPS data showing when Reed's vehicle had stopped moving. But her account raised troubling questions. No official vehicles, highway patrol, maintenance, or emergency services had been sent to that area until later that afternoon. If the vehicle with the flashing light wasn't an official responder, who was it? The investigation took an even more disturbing turn 3 days after Reed's disappearance. A Montana Fish and Wildlife officer patrolling a remote access road about 12 miles from Black Frost Canyon discovered an abandoned SUV partially hidden among trees. The black Ford Explorer had been wiped clean of fingerprints, its license plates removed. Inside, forensic technicians found something chilling, a dashboard-mounted light bar like those used by unmarked police vehicles, along with a police band radio scanner. Most damning was what they found in the rear cargo area: zip ties, duct tape, a stun gun, and traces of blood that would later be matched to Alexander Reed through DNA analysis. The discovery transformed a missing person case into a suspected abduction, but the question remained: who would target a truck driver in the middle of a snowstorm on a remote mountain highway, and why? The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. 2 weeks after Reed's disappearance, authorities in Wyoming arrested a man for impersonating a police officer after he attempted to pull over an off-duty sheriff's deputy. The suspect, 37-year-old Wesley Gaines, was driving a white SUV equipped with hidden emergency lights. A search of Gaines's apartment in Cheyenne revealed a disturbing collection: police scanners, multiple light bars and sirens, fake badges from various law enforcement agencies, and a collection of trucker CB radios. Most significant was Gaines's laptop, which contained a folder labeled Routes, with detailed information on remote highways across 5 states, including notes on cell coverage, dead zones, and typical patrol schedules. Another folder labeled Drivers contained surveillance photos of multiple truck drivers, including Alexander Reed, along with information about their regular routes and schedules. As investigators looked into Gaines's background, a troubling picture emerged. The former security guard had applied to multiple police departments over the years, but had been rejected each time during psychological evaluation stages. He had collected an extensive amount of police memorabilia and spent hours listening to scanner traffic. Neighbors described him as obsessed with law enforcement and noted that he often wore tactical clothing and drove vehicles that looked like unmarked police cars. When confronted with evidence linking him to the Black Frost Canyon incident, Gaines initially denied any involvement. However, facing mounting forensic evidence, including cell tower data placing him in the area on the morning of Reed's disappearance, he eventually confessed to a pattern of crimes targeting isolated truckers. According to Gaines's confession, he had developed a method for identifying vulnerable drivers on remote routes. Using police scanners and CB radio, he would listen for truckers reporting their positions during bad weather or mechanical troubles. Posing as law enforcement, he would approach the stranded drivers, gain their trust, and then overpower them. They always open the door, he told investigators in a recorded interview. When someone thinks you're a cop, they don't question it. They're programmed to comply. In Reed's case, Gaines admitted to monitoring CB chatter during the snowstorm and hearing Reed's call to his dispatcher about the worsening conditions. Recognizing an opportunity, he followed Reed's truck through Black Frost Canyon, waiting until the driver pulled over to wait out the storm. Using emergency lights and wearing what appeared to be an official uniform, Gaines approached the truck, claiming to be checking on stranded motorists. When Reed opened his door, Gaines incapacitated him with a stun gun before forcing him into the SUV. The presence of Bethany Hoffman's truck in the turnout had been an unexpected complication, but Gaines had maintained his law enforcement persona, even nodding acknowledgement to her as she pulled away, a chilling detail Hoffman would later confirm. What happened next remains one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. Gaines took Reed to an abandoned hunting cabin deep in the Bitterroot Wilderness, a location so remote it was only accessible by four-wheel drive vehicles in good weather. There, according to forensic evidence later collected from the site, he held Reed captive for approximately 38 hours before the trucker attempted to escape during a moment when Gaines was outside checking his vehicle. Weakened by exposure and injuries from the stun gun, Reed made it less than a mile before collapsing in the snow. His remains were eventually recovered based on information provided by Gaines as part of a plea agreement, ending the agonizing uncertainty for his family, if not their grief. As the investigation expanded, authorities linked Gaines to 3 other cases of missing truckers across Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho, dating back to 2006. In each instance, the pattern was similar. Drivers disappeared from remote locations during bad weather, their trucks found abandoned but intact, with few clues to their fate. In July 2009, Wesley Gaines pleaded guilty to 4 counts of kidnapping and murder, receiving multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. During sentencing, the judge described his crimes as predatory in the most calculating sense, noting the extraordinary measures Gaines had taken to target victims who were isolated and vulnerable. The Black Frost Canyon incident and subsequent investigation fundamentally changed security protocols within the trucking industry. Companies implemented enhanced GPS tracking systems that could detect unusual stops and trigger automatic alerts. Many carriers began requiring check-in calls when drivers stopped in remote areas, regardless of weather or time of day. Some outfitted their fleets with dashboard cameras that activated when someone approached the truck. Perhaps most significantly, the case prompted a nationwide advisory to commercial drivers about verifying the identity of anyone claiming to be law enforcement, particularly in isolated areas. The Trust But Verify protocol, calling dispatch to confirm the legitimacy of an officer before opening doors, has become standard practice among long-haul truckers. For those who still drive the mountain routes of the northern Rockies, particularly Highway 472 through Black Frost Canyon, Alexander Reed's story serves as a somber reminder of the unique vulnerabilities faced by those who keep America's supply chains moving through the most isolated corners of the country. A small memorial plaque now stands at the turnout where Reed was last seen, bearing his name and the names of Gaines's other victims. Truckers passing through often stop briefly to leave small tokens, coins, keychains, or truck miniatures, a gesture of solidarity with a fellow driver who never made it home. The legacy of the Black Frost Canyon incident lives on in the changed practices of an entire industry and in the heightened awareness among truckers that sometimes the greatest dangers on America's highways have nothing to do with road conditions or mechanical failures, but with the predators who understand and exploit the solitary nature of their profession. As veteran trucker Bethany Hoffman, whose chance encounter placed her unwittingly at the edge of a nightmare, would later observe, "We're the most visible invisible people in America. Everyone sees our trucks, but few people think about the vulnerable human being inside that cab, often alone, often in the middle of nowhere, just trying to do their job." Marcus Delaney had been driving hazardous materials for 8 years. During that time, he transported everything from industrial chemicals to medical waste. At 42, he had built a reputation as one of the most reliable hazmat drivers at Continental Transport. He had a spotless safety record and perfect compliance history. His specialized training and careful attention to detail made him the company's first choice for sensitive or high-value cargo. It was this reputation that led to his assignment on October 12, 2016, a transport that would test every protocol he'd ever learned and expose a frightening reality about America's hazardous materials transportation system. The early autumn night was unusually cold as Delaney arrived at the Arcturus Chemical Research Facility outside of Boise, Idaho. The facility had no signs except for a Department of Energy identification number. It was one of dozens of privately contracted labs developing industrial compounds for government use. Security was tight. Delaney had to surrender his phone before armed guards escorted him to the loading dock. This shipment is classified Level 4 containment, the facility's shipping coordinator told him, sliding a digital tablet across the desk for his signature. Destination is the DHMS facility in Missoula. You'll be taking Northern Route 375. It's been cleared of all construction, and the Highway Patrol has been notified to expect you. Level 4 was rare, the highest security and containment protocol for non-nuclear materials. In 8 years of hazmat driving, Delaney had handled only 2 Level 4 shipments. Both had involved military-grade chemical agents being transported to secure government facilities. Both had included an armed escort. I don't see any escort assignment in the manifest, Delaney noted, scanning the digital documents. Budget cuts, the coordinator replied with a shrug. They're monitoring via satellite. You've got the secure comms unit, right? Delaney nodded. The specialized communication device installed in his cab allowed for constant contact with both his dispatcher and federal monitoring systems, regardless of cellular coverage, standard for Level 4 transports. What wasn't standard was the size of the cargo, a single specialized containment cylinder barely 4 feet tall and 2 feet in diameter, secured to a specially designed pallet. Most Level 4 shipments filled an entire trailer. What exactly am I carrying? Delaney asked, knowing the answer before the coordinator gave it. That's need to know. And according to this paperwork, you don't need to know, the man replied, tapping the manifest. What you do need to know is that if containment is breached, the emergency protocol is immediate evacuation to a minimum safe distance of 5 miles upwind. There's a specialized containment kit in the storage compartment of your cab. Use it only as a last resort. It's essentially a heavily reinforced body bag for the cylinder. Delaney had transported enough dangerous materials to understand what a 5-mile evacuation zone meant. Whatever was in that cylinder was extremely toxic, likely airborne, and almost certainly lethal. By 10:30 p.m., the cylinder was secured in Delaney's specially equipped trailer. The manifest was signed, and he was heading north on Route 375, a stretch of highway that wound through some of Idaho's most isolated mountain terrain. The route would take about 6 hours in ideal conditions. The weather forecast had predicted light snow after midnight, but nothing that should slow his progress. At 11:47 p.m., Delaney made his first scheduled check-in via the secure comm system. Checkpoint Alpha reached. All systems normal. Cargo secure. Current position is mile marker 47 on Route 375 North. Estimated arrival at Checkpoint Bravo in 55 minutes. The response came immediately. Acknowledged transport 87. Satellite monitoring confirms your position. Be advised. Weather pattern has intensified. Snow accumulation may reach 4 inches by 0200 hours. Delaney wasn't worried. His truck was equipped with specialized tires and weight distribution systems designed for bad weather. 4 inches of snow was well within his operational capabilities. What neither Delaney nor his monitoring team could have predicted was the catastrophic failure of a crucial component in his truck's electrical system, specifically the specialized alternator designed to power both the engine and the separate cooling system required for certain types of hazardous materials. At 12:23 a.m., as Delaney drove through a particularly isolated stretch of highway between ridge lines, his dashboard lit up with warning lights. The primary electrical system was failing. Within seconds, the secondary backup engaged, but the strain on the system was obvious as the dashboard flickered. Following protocol, Delaney immediately radioed in the situation. Transport 87 reporting electrical system malfunction. Primary system down, secondary engaging but showing strain. Requesting immediate technical support and possible escort. The response came through with noticeable static. The backup system wasn't providing full power to the communications array. Transport 87, satellite confirms electrical anomalies. Nearest technical support is approximately 90 minutes from your position. Rerouting Highway Patrol unit to your location. Estimated arrival 45 minutes. Your priority is cargo integrity. If necessary, initiate stationary protocol. Stationary protocol meant pulling over, engaging manual locks on the cargo containment systems, and waiting for assistance. It was standard procedure for mechanical failures, but that procedure assumed functioning environmental controls within the trailer. Before Delaney could respond, the backup electrical system failed completely. The truck's engine died, leaving him coasting on a darkened stretch of highway with only emergency battery power for essential systems. The specialized cooling unit for the trailer, which required continuous power, would function on backup batteries for approximately 30 minutes before failing. In the sudden silence of the dead engine, Delaney heard something he hadn't noticed before, a faint but distinct hissing sound coming from the trailer. Every hazmat driver knows that unexpected noises from containment areas represent worst-case scenarios. Delaney immediately engaged the emergency brake, bringing the truck to a controlled stop on the shoulder. Using his flashlight, he exited the cab and moved cautiously toward the trailer. The hissing was louder now, clearly coming from the sealed containment area. Following protocol, Delaney didn't immediately open the trailer. Instead, he accessed the external monitoring panel, a small digital display that showed conditions inside, powered by its own independent battery. The reading made his blood run cold. Internal temperature 57 degrees and rising. Normal operating range for this cargo was between 35 degrees to 40 degrees. More alarming was the atmospheric sensor, which showed trace amounts of an unidentified compound in the trailer's air. The containment was failing. Delaney had about 20 minutes before the cooling system failed completely. The rising temperature inside was already compromising the specialized cylinder's integrity. He had three options: attempt to repair the electrical system and restore power to the cooling unit, deploy the emergency containment kit to encase the cylinder and hope it held until help arrived, or execute the most extreme protocol: intentional isolation. Intentional isolation was a procedure Delaney had only read about in training manuals. It involved moving the hazardous material as far from population centers as possible, securing it, and then evacuating, essentially sacrificing the cargo, but ensuring no collateral exposure. Given his location deep in the mountains, with the nearest town over 30 miles away, Delaney made his decision. He would attempt to use the emergency containment kit, and if that failed, he would implement intentional isolation. The emergency containment kit was stored in a reinforced case behind the driver's seat. As Delaney retrieved it, the secure comm unit crackled to life, operating on its independent power source. Transport 87, be advised, we're detecting containment anomalies via satellite thermal imaging. Highway Patrol ETA now 38 minutes. Hazmat response team has been scrambled from Missoula, ETA 3 hours. Confirm your situation. Delaney's response was brief. Implementing emergency containment procedures. Cooling system failure imminent. Breaches likely within 15 minutes. Request immediate airspace restriction and evacuation order for 5-mile radius. The gravity of his words was not lost on the monitoring team. Their response was immediate. Understood, Transport 87. Emergency protocols activated. Satellite uplink will remain active. We've lost telemetry on the cargo sensors. You are now our only eyes on site. With the specialized containment bag in hand, Delaney approached the trailer. The standard procedure required him to open the sealed doors, deploy the bag over the cylinder, and seal it manually, a process that would inevitably expose him to whatever was leaking from the container. The hazmat suit in his emergency kit would provide limited protection, but level 4 materials often required specialized containment beyond standard protective gear. Nevertheless, he had no choice. If the cylinder failed completely, the consequences could be catastrophic for communities downwind. As he put on the protective suit, Delaney mentally reviewed the evacuation map for Route 375. The wind was coming from the northwest, which meant any airborne release would travel southeast, directly toward the town of Riverwood, population 1,200, approximately 32 miles away. With the suit secured and oxygen flowing from the attached tank, Delaney unlocked the trailer doors. The hissing was immediately louder. He swung the doors open, illuminating the interior with his flashlight. The cylinder sat in the center of the trailer, secured to its specialized pallet. Frost had formed along a hairline crack in its surface, a clear sign that the supercooled material inside was responding to the rising temperature. As he watched, a thin vapor escaped from the crack, spreading in the trailer's air. Moving quickly, Delaney unfolded the emergency containment bag, essentially a heavily reinforced, chemically resistant body bag designed to contain leaking materials. The process required him to move the cylinder into the bag and seal it with a specialized locking mechanism, all while avoiding direct contact with the leaking material. The procedure took 7 minutes. 7 minutes of exposure to whatever vapor was escaping the cylinder. The suit's external sensors showed no immediate atmospheric threats, but Delaney knew that many level 4 materials were undetectable with standard equipment. With the cylinder secured in the containment bag, Delaney resealed the trailer and returned to the cab. His oxygen tank showed 22 minutes of remaining supply, enough to reach safety if he moved quickly. Following intentional isolation protocol, Delaney drove the disabled truck further from the highway, using only the momentum of the slope and his remaining battery power to steer onto a fire access road. He positioned the vehicle in a clearing approximately half a mile from the main road, as far from potential civilian exposure as possible. After engaging all remaining locks and security systems, Delaney hiked back to the highway. The highway patrol found him walking along the shoulder at 1:17 a.m., approximately 3 miles from where he had left the truck. The hazmat response team reached the abandoned truck at 3:45 a.m. By then, thermal imaging showed the temperature inside the trailer had reached 112 degrees. Despite this, the emergency containment bag had held, preventing what investigators would later determine could have been catastrophic exposure to an experimental compound designed for rapid deployment in conflict zones. Marcus Delaney spent 3 days under medical observation. Though no immediate symptoms appeared, he would require monthly screenings for the next 5 years to monitor for delayed effects from potential exposure. The incident led to a congressional investigation into private transportation of experimental materials and sweeping reforms in escort requirements for Level 4 transports. Delaney's actions were credited with preventing potential civilian casualties, though the exact nature of the material he transported remains classified. He never drove hazmat again. The psychological impact of those moments in the trailer, exposed to an unknown lethal compound, proved too traumatic to overcome. He now works as a safety consultant, using his experience to train a new generation of specialized transport drivers. For those who drive America's most dangerous cargoes along isolated routes, Delaney's experience has become a case study in both the risks they face and the responsibility they bear. Moving materials most people don't know exist through places most people will never see, with consequences most people can't imagine. On the moonless night of July 8, 2011, trucker Logan Mitchell pulled his 18-wheeler into the sagebrush rest area along Interstate 10, about 80 miles east of Phoenix, Arizona. After 11 hours hauling refrigerated produce from California to Texas, the 39-year-old needed his mandatory break before continuing his journey. Mitchell was an experienced driver who had traveled this route dozens of times. Like many truckers, he had his favorite stopping points, places he considered safe and quiet. The sagebrush rest area, with its large lot allowing trucks to park well away from highway noise, had always been one of his preferred stops. What Mitchell couldn't have known was that this routine stop would place him at the center of one of the most disturbing serial murder cases in recent American history. At 6:17 a.m. the next morning, Mitchell failed to check in with his dispatcher, missing his scheduled departure time. When repeated calls to his cell phone went unanswered, his employer contacted Arizona Highway Patrol, requesting a welfare check at Mitchell's last known location. Trooper Diego Navarro arrived at the sagebrush rest area at 7:45 a.m. He found Mitchell's truck, a blue Peterbilt with refrigeration unit, parked in the far corner of the lot, engine off, doors locked. Through the window, Navarro could see Mitchell slumped in the driver's seat. Initial thoughts of a medical emergency quickly gave way to a more sinister reality when Navarro broke the window to gain entry. Logan Mitchell had been strangled with a thin wire garrote. The medical examiner would later determine that death had occurred between 2:00 and 3:00 a.m. His wallet remained in his back pocket containing $156 in cash. His logbook showed a final entry at 11:42 p.m. noting his arrival and planned departure time. Nothing appeared to be missing from the truck. The most unsettling detail was what responding officers found clutched in Mitchell's right hand, a small plastic whistle, yellow in color, of the type commonly sold in children's toy stores. It hadn't belonged to Mitchell, according to his family. It appeared to have been deliberately placed in his hand after death. The case might have remained an isolated tragedy if not for what happened 3 weeks later at the Cactus Flats rest area, 150 miles east along the same stretch of I-10 in New Mexico. On July 29, 2011, another trucker, 43-year-old Gabriela Ortiz, was found murdered in the sleeper berth of her truck under eerily similar circumstances. Like Mitchell, Ortiz had been garroted with a thin wire. Like Mitchell, nothing had been stolen, and like Mitchell, a small plastic whistle, this one blue, had been placed in her hand. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Law enforcement agencies in Arizona and New Mexico formed a joint task force, bringing in FBI support to investigate what they now suspected was the work of a serial killer targeting long-haul truckers. As detectives reviewed months of incident reports from rest areas along I-10, they discovered something chilling. Mitchell and Ortiz weren't the first victims. 7 months earlier, in December 2010, 51-year-old Walter Chen had been found dead in his truck at a rest stop just west of Las Cruces, New Mexico. His death had initially been attributed to a heart attack, but the autopsy had noted unusual bruising around his neck that hadn't been fully explained. When investigators re-examined Chen's case file, they found a detail that had been noted but not considered important. A small green whistle had been found on the floor of the cab near the body, assumed to have fallen from Chen's pocket. His family, when interviewed, confirmed that Chen had not owned such an item. The task force now had 3 linked cases spanning 3 states along the same interstate corridor. Media outlets dubbed the unknown killer the Whistler, and trucking companies began issuing warnings to drivers about traveling alone along I-10, particularly at night. Forensic analysis yielded frustratingly little. The wire garrote appeared to be standard picture hanging wire available at any hardware store. The whistles were mass-produced toys sold in dollar stores across the country. No fingerprints, DNA, or other traceable evidence had been left behind. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Following a news conference about the murders, a truck stop employee in Las Cruces, New Mexico, contacted authorities with information that would fundamentally change the investigation. Alicia Torres, a night shift cashier at the Roadrunner Truck Plaza, reported that in the weeks before Ortiz's murder, she had observed a peculiar interaction. A man driving a white panel van with Arizona plates had approached several truckers in the parking lot, offering to sell them security devices for their rigs, supposedly small alarms that would trigger if anyone tried to break into the cab while they slept. He seemed to specifically target drivers who were alone, Torres told investigators. He'd watched the lot from his van, then approached them as they were heading back to their trucks for the night. Torres had found the man suspicious enough that she'd written down his license plate number and kept it in her wallet. That number led authorities to Marcus Weber, a 47-year-old former security system installer living in Tucson. When detectives ran Weber's name through law enforcement databases, they discovered a history of minor offenses, mostly petty theft and one charge of impersonating a security guard that had been dropped when the complainant failed to appear in court. More significantly, they found that Weber had been fired from his job at a home security company 3 years earlier after customers complained about his increasingly erratic behavior and inappropriate comments about their personal safety. Surveillance was established on Weber's residence, a small house on the outskirts of Tucson where he lived alone. Detectives observed him making regular trips along I-10, stopping at rest areas and truck stops, apparently watching the comings and goings of vehicles. On August 18, 2011, they observed him approach a female trucker at the Granite Pass rest area, carrying what appeared to be a small electronic device. After a brief conversation, the trucker declined whatever he was offering and returned to her vehicle. That night, investigators followed Weber back to the same rest area around 1:00 a.m. When they observed him attempting to gain entry to an occupied truck while wearing gloves, they moved in for an arrest. In Weber's van, they found a disturbing collection of items: picture hanging wire cut into 3-foot lengths, a bag containing several dozen plastic whistles in various colors, and a notebook with detailed observations about truck stops and rest areas along I-10, including notes on which ones had security cameras and how frequently they were patrolled. Most damning was a crude map marking the locations of the 3 known murders, each annotated with a date and a small colored dot corresponding to the color of the whistle left at each scene. The arrest of Marcus Weber led to one of the most disturbing revelations in the case. During questioning, Weber initially denied any involvement in the murders, but when confronted with the evidence from his van, he began to share details that only the killer could have known, including the exact manner in which the garrotes had been applied and the precise placement of the whistles in the victim's hands. What emerged was a twisted methodology. Weber had developed an approach that exploited the natural caution of long-haul truckers while simultaneously using their isolation against them. Posing as a security consultant selling anti-theft devices, he would gain truckers' trust and attention. The small electronic device he showed them was actually just a modified car alarm remote with no real function. Most of them turned me down, he told investigators, but some were interested. All I needed was for them to open the door. Once invited into a truck's cab to demonstrate his security system, Weber would use the opportunity to strike, employing the garrote with practiced efficiency. The whistles, he explained with a disturbing lack of emotion, were his signature, a twisted reference to the idea that no one would hear them whistle for help. Forensic analysis of Weber's home computer revealed something even more chilling, a document titled Rest Stop Protocol, outlining his selection criteria for victims. He specifically targeted drivers who were alone and chose rest areas known for low traffic during overnight hours. He avoided truck stops with 24-hour services, preferring isolated highway rest areas where trucks might be widely spaced apart. Most disturbing was his methodology for selecting which truck to approach. He would circle rest areas using a handheld scanner to detect CB radio transmissions from inside trucks. When he identified a driver communicating with other truckers, he would move on. He specifically sought out drivers who appeared to be completely alone, with no communication with others, those least likely to be immediately missed. As the investigation expanded, authorities linked Weber to 5 additional unsolved deaths of truckers across the Southwest, dating back to 2009. In each case, the deaths had been attributed to other causes, heart attacks, strokes, or unknown medical conditions, as the garrote marks had been subtle enough to be missed by first responders focused on more obvious explanations for a trucker found dead in their cab. In March 2012, Marcus Weber pleaded guilty to 8 counts of first-degree murder to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to multiple life terms without the possibility of parole. When asked by the judge if he wished to make a statement, Weber's only response was, "They never heard me coming." The case of the Whistler sent shockwaves through the trucking industry. Companies implemented new safety protocols, including buddy systems for drivers on long hauls and enhanced security features in newer trucks. Many drivers began traveling in loose convoys, maintaining radio contact with colleagues even during rest periods. Some truck stops installed panic buttons in parking areas and increased security patrols during overnight hours. The American Trucking Association launched a campaign called Never Alone, providing resources for drivers to connect with each other along routes, and creating a system where drivers could check in with dispatchers before opening their doors to strangers, regardless of the reason. For the families of the victims, the resolution of the case brought closure but little comfort. During Weber's sentencing, Logan Mitchell's widow addressed the court. "My husband spent 20 years on the road, always careful, always vigilant. He loved the freedom of the open highway. This monster didn't just take his life. He took that sense of freedom from an entire community of drivers who keep this country running." Today, a small memorial stands at the Sagebrush Rest Area, where Logan Mitchell spent his final hours. Truckers passing through often sound their horns in tribute, a gesture that has become known among drivers as the Mitchell Warning, a reminder to remain vigilant even in the most familiar places. The I-10 corridor from California to Texas remains one of the busiest freight routes in America. At night, the rest area is still filled with trucks as drivers take their mandatory breaks. But in the years since the arrest of Marcus Weber, something has changed. Drivers cluster their rigs closer together, lights remain on in cabs that once would have gone dark, and on the CB radio, a new sign-off has become common among truckers heading to rest. Keep your doors locked and your whistles ready. The case of the I-10 rest stop murders fundamentally altered how an entire industry thinks about personal safety. For the hundreds of thousands of men and women who make their living on America's highways, the legacy of the Whistler is a heightened awareness that sometimes the greatest dangers aren't found on the road itself, but in the seemingly safe places where they stop along the way. As veteran trucker and safety advocate Isabella Martinez puts it, before Weber, we worried about accidents, weather, mechanical failures. Now we know there's a different kind of hazard out there. People who see our solitude as vulnerability. The open road will never feel quite the same.